I'm Miranda Coleman, 32, and I returned from a 4-year international assignment to find my sister Natalie had emptied our $2.7 million inheritance. My grandfather's estate was meant to be split equally between us, but somehow everything vanished while I was building schools in Singapore. When I confronted my parents, they just stared at the floor, complicit in their silence. The legal documents showed everything transferred to her name alone. I didn't scream or cry. I simply smiled, knowing exactly what I needed to do next. If you're watching this story about family betrayal and justice, take a second to let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join my journey of healing and reclaiming what's rightfully mine. My grandfather Harrison was the cornerstone of our family. He built a successful construction business from nothing, working his way up from a single truck and a toolbox to a company that eventually employed over 50 people in our community. His calloused hands told stories of determination, and his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed at his own jokes. Growing up, those summer visits to his lake house were the highlight of every year for both me and my sister Natalie. The lake house sat on 20 acres of pristine waterfront property, with a wooden dock that stretched into crystal clear water. Grandpa Harrison would take us fishing at dawn, teaching us patience and persistence as we waited for the perfect catch. Natalie always got bored quickly, but I could sit beside him for hours, listening to his stories about business challenges and life lessons. Even then, the difference between us was clear. Natalie wanted immediate gratification while I appreciated the value of waiting for something worthwhile. Miranda has my spirit, Grandpa would tell our parents, Eleanor and George. This girl understands that good things come to those who work hard and stay honest. These words would prove ironically prophetic years later. When I graduated with my master's degree in international development, I received an offer that seemed too good to refuse. A prestigious organization wanted me to lead their educational infrastructure projects in Singapore. The position meant 4 years abroad, building schools in underserved communities, and creating sustainable education models. It was my dream job, combining my passion for education with my grandfather's legacy of building. The goodbye party my parents hosted was bittersweet. Mom made my favorite chocolate raspberry cake, and Dad grilled steaks the way only he could. Grandpa Harrison gave me an antique compass that had belonged to his father. "To keep you pointed in the right direction," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "And to help you find a way back home when it's time." Natalie seemed genuinely supportive that night, toasting my success and promising to send care packages. My parents hugged me tight and assured me they would handle everything back home. "Don't worry about a thing here," Dad said firmly. "Focus on your work. We've got everything under control." For the first year, our weekly video calls showed everything proceeding normally. Mom would prop up her iPad at Sunday dinner, and I'd join the family virtually from my small apartment in Singapore. Grandpa Harrison would always insist on talking privately with me for a few minutes, asking detailed questions about my projects and sharing updates about his business decisions. Then, during my second year abroad, Grandpa's health began to decline unexpectedly. What started as just a little tiredness progressed to a diagnosis of congestive heart failure complicated by the early stages of dementia. The strong, vibrant man who could outwork men half his age suddenly needed assistance with basic tasks. The frequency of family calls decreased. Natalie, who had always maintained a casual job-hopping lifestyle, suddenly announced she would help manage Grandpa's care and business affairs. My parents seemed relieved by her unexpected responsibility. I offered to come home, but everyone insisted I continue my work. "Your grandfather is so proud of what you're doing," Mom said. "He wouldn't want you to abandon those children who need schools." When Grandpa Harrison passed away during my 3rd year abroad, I managed to get emergency leave for the funeral. The service was beautiful, with the community showing up in force to honor a man who had employed and supported so many families. I noticed Natalie stayed unusually close to our grandfather's attorney, William Pearson, throughout the service. When I asked about the will and inheritance process, the answers were vague. "We're handling everything, Miranda," my father said, patting my hand. "The legal stuff is complicated. We'll sort it all out." "Grandpa wanted everything taken care of properly," Natalie added with an odd smile. Don't worry your head about it while you're doing such important work overseas. I returned to Singapore with a heaviness in my heart, but threw myself into completing my projects. Through occasional video calls, I noticed subtle changes at home. My parents' updates became briefer, less specific. Natalie was often absent from these calls, apparently busy with estate matters. When I asked direct questions about Grandpa's business or properties, the subject would quickly change. What I didn't know then was that Grandpa Harrison had left an estate valued at approximately $5.4 million, including the construction business, the lake house property, his primary residence, and various investments he had made throughout his successful life. His will, drafted when he was still in perfect health, explicitly stated that these assets should be divided equally between his two granddaughters, with my parents receiving lifetime rights to live in their home, which was technically owned by my grandfather. While I focused on finishing schools and training local teachers thousands of miles away, the groundwork for betrayal was being carefully laid at home. After 4 years of building schools across Southeast Asia, I finally returned home with a heart full of accomplishment and anticipation. The emotional homecoming I expected quickly turned awkward. My parents greeted me at the airport with stiff hugs and nervous smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Natalie was conspicuously absent, texting last minute that she had an appointment she couldn't reschedule. The first sign something was seriously wrong appeared in our driveway. A brand new Mercedes SUV sat gleaming in the spot where my father's trusty old pickup truck used to be. Inside, the house had undergone an expensive renovation, with designer furniture replacing the comfortable, worn pieces I'd grown up with. My mother, usually dressed in practical clothing, now wore a designer watch and cashmere sweater. "The house looks different," I commented, running my hand over marble countertops that had replaced the laminate ones. "Natalie helped us update a few things," Mom said, her eyes darting to Dad. "We needed some changes." When my sister finally appeared for dinner that evening, she arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary in Singapore. Her previously shoulder-length hair was now professionally highlighted and styled, and a massive diamond tennis bracelet glinted on her wrist. Something cold settled in my stomach as she air-kissed my cheek. "Welcome home, world traveler," she said with a smile that didn't warm her eyes. "I've been so busy managing everything here while you were off saving the world." When I casually brought up Grandpa's inheritance over dinner, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dad suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes, and Mom got up unnecessarily to refill water glasses that were still full. "Oh, I handled all the paperwork," Natalie said dismissively, waving her hand. "It was such a complicated process. Probably would have been easier if you had been here, but someone had to step up." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt profoundly wrong. I slipped into my grandfather's old study, now redecorated as a meditation room, with expensive yoga equipment. The antique desk where he'd taught me to balance a checkbook was gone. The safe hidden behind his favorite painting of the lake was empty when I checked it, missing the important documents he'd always kept there. The next morning, I drove to William Pearson's law office unannounced. The receptionist seemed uncomfortable when I gave my name and made me wait nearly an hour before the attorney would see me. William, who had known me since childhood, couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Miranda, it's good to see you back," he said, shuffling papers on his desk. "Your sister mentioned you might stop by eventually." "I'd like to see my grandfather's will and the inheritance documents," I said directly. "I understand there may have been some distributions while I was away." His hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. "Well, there were some amendments to the original intentions. Your grandfather made some changes before he passed." What William reluctantly showed me sent the room spinning. A series of amended documents had transferred everything, the business, properties, investments, solely to Natalie. My name had been removed entirely. According to the paperwork, these changes had been made about 8 months before Grandpa died, when I was in the middle of my 3rd year abroad. "This can't be right," I whispered, staring at the signatures. "Grandpa always said he was leaving everything equally to both of us." William looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I understand this must be difficult. Your sister presented these documents with your grandfather's signature. Everything appeared to be in order legally. I drove straight to my parents' house, tears blurring my vision. They were sitting in the newly remodeled sunroom, looking tense as if they'd been expecting me. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Did you know Natalie took everything?" Their silence answered before their words did. Mom started crying silently while Dad looked at the floor. "Your sister convinced your grandfather that she needed it more," Dad finally said. "She's a single mother now. Did you know that? She has Timothy to support." I hadn't known my sister had a child. No one had mentioned this in our video calls. Later, I would learn that single mother was a significant stretch of the truth. Natalie had a perfectly supportive husband named Jeffrey who had a good job in pharmaceutical sales. "Natalie told Grandpa you weren't coming back," Mom added softly. "She said you had abandoned the family for your career, that you didn't care about his legacy." The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Through conversations with family friends and my Aunt Rebecca, I learned that Natalie had systematically poisoned my grandfather against me during his cognitive decline. She had intercepted cards and letters I sent, deleted voicemails, and convinced him I had forgotten him. All while I was working 18-hour days, believing I was making him proud. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, the only room Natalie hadn't redecorated yet, I cried until there were no tears left. The compass Grandpa had given me sat on my nightstand, its needle still pointing true north while my family's moral compass had spun wildly off course. Over the next few weeks, I attempted to reason with my parents individually, hoping to find an ally in this nightmare. I caught my father alone in the garage, organizing tools with the precision he'd always valued. "Dad, you know this isn't right," I said quietly. "Grandpa Harrison would never have cut me out completely if he was thinking clearly." Dad's shoulders slumped as he placed a wrench carefully in its outlined space. "Miranda, you don't understand what it's been like here. Natalie, she's changed. When she wants something, she becomes someone I don't recognize. So, you just let her take everything? You didn't stand up for me at all?" His silence told me everything. My father, once my steadfast defender, had surrendered to the path of least resistance. My mother was equally unhelpful, though in a different way. When confronted in the garden where she was planting expensive exotic flowers that replaced her beloved native perennials, she burst into tears. "Your sister needed the money. She had debts, gambling problems she didn't want anyone to know about. She promised she would share with you eventually." This was the first mention of gambling, a new piece in the increasingly disturbing puzzle. My Aunt Rebecca, my mother's sister, who had always maintained a clear-eyed view of family dynamics, provided more clarity when I visited her small apartment across town. "Natalie started going to the casino about 3 years ago, right around when you left," Aunt Rebecca explained, serving me tea in her modest kitchen. "It started small, but then she got in deep with credit card debt. When your grandfather began declining, she saw an opportunity." Rebecca described how Natalie had methodically positioned herself as the devoted granddaughter, driving Grandpa to appointments, managing his medications, and gradually isolating him from other family and friends. All while I was building schools in villages without electricity, unaware of the manipulation happening at home. "She convinced Harrison that you had abandoned the family legacy," Rebecca said sadly. "She would show him doctored emails, making it seem like you refused to call or visit. By the time his dementia progressed, he believed her version of reality." The betrayal deepened when I discovered that Natalie had not only taken the inheritance, but had begun dismantling parts of Grandpa's legacy. She had fired loyal employees from the construction business who had worked for him for decades, replacing them with friends who knew nothing about construction but offered her constant validation. I ran into Jeffrey, Natalie's husband, at the local grocery store. His discomfort was palpable as he pretended to be intensely interested in selecting apples. "I'm sorry about everything, Miranda," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure Natalie wasn't nearby. "I've told her it isn't right, but she won't listen. She's convinced herself she deserves it all." "And what about Timothy?" I asked. "Mom said Natalie's a single mother now." Jeffrey looked confused. "Timothy? Our son is with my mother today." We're still very much married, Miranda. I don't know why she would say otherwise. The lies were multiplying. During a painfully awkward family dinner that weekend, Natalie flaunted her new diamond earrings and casually mentioned the European vacation she and Jeffrey were planning. "We're thinking the Amalfi Coast," she said, refilling her wine glass for the third time. "Timothy is old enough now to appreciate cultural experiences." I noticed my parents exchanging glances, but saying nothing. The child they'd used to justify the inheritance theft was apparently being used as a prop in a larger performance. When I tried to steer the conversation toward the business, Natalie expertly deflected. Meanwhile, my own financial situation grew precarious. I had depleted most of my savings on the move back home, expecting to step into my inheritance and perhaps a role in the family business. Instead, I found myself living in a small apartment I could barely afford, applying for jobs that couldn't match the impact or satisfaction of my international work. While clearing out the last of my childhood possessions, I discovered a box of letters in the attic, correspondence between me and Grandpa that had apparently never been mailed in either direction. Letters where I detailed my projects and expressed how much I missed him. Letters from him expressing pride and love, explaining his health challenges, and consistently mentioning his intention to split his estate equally between Natalie and me. The most damning evidence came when I learned from Walter, a longtime foreman at the construction company, that Natalie had fired all the original employees within weeks of taking control. "Your grandfather built this company treating people like family," Walter told me, meeting secretly at a diner outside town. "Your sister came in like a tornado, fired anyone who questioned her, and brought in her casino friends to run departments they know nothing about. The company's reputation is tanking fast." When I confronted my father about his failure to intervene in the business destruction, he finally admitted the truth. "I'm afraid of her, Miranda," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "She threatened to cut us off completely if we didn't support her version of events. Your mother and I were too old to start over. This house, our retirement, everything depends on Natalie's goodwill now." My mother's subsequent confession was equally disturbing. Through tears, she admitted they had been enabling Natalie's manipulative behavior since childhood. "It was easier to give her what she wanted than deal with the tantrums," Mom said, twisting her expensive new scarf between her fingers. "We always thought she would outgrow it. By the time we realized how destructive the pattern was, it was too late to change course." I had returned home expecting to rebuild my life among family. Instead, I found myself isolated, betrayed, and watching helplessly as my grandfather's legacy was dismantled piece by someone who saw it only as a means to fund her lifestyle and gambling addiction. The one-year anniversary memorial service for Grandpa Harrison became the breaking point in our family's quiet civil war. Natalie arranged an elaborate event at the country club, inviting business associates and community members to what she called a celebration of legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched her work the room in an inappropriately flashy black designer dress, accepting condolences as if she alone had suffered a loss. The program featured several speakers, mostly business associates who shared genuine stories about my grandfather's integrity and generosity. Then Natalie took the podium, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "My grandfather and I shared a special bond," she began, her voice artificially thick with emotion. "During his final years, he entrusted me with his legacy, knowing I alone understood his vision for the future." Something snapped inside me. I had remained dignified for months, pursuing quiet inquiries and gathering information. But hearing her claim a special relationship while standing in 4-inch heels purchased with stolen inheritance pushed me past my breaking point. "That's not true," I said, standing up from my seat near the back. The room fell silent as heads turned toward me. "Grandpa Harrison intended his legacy for both of us. You manipulated him when he was vulnerable." Natalie's practiced composure slipped momentarily before she regained control. "Miranda is still adjusting to being home after abandoning our family for years," she told the uncomfortable audience. "Perhaps this isn't the place for her confusion." "It's not confusion," I responded, walking toward the front of the room. "It's the truth." While I was building schools in villages without running water, you were convincing our grandfather I'd forgotten him. You intercepted our letters. You changed his will when he was no longer himself. The carefully maintained facade of family unity shattered as Natalie's face contorted with rage. You left. You chose strangers on the other side of the world over your own family. Why should you get anything when you couldn't even be bothered to come home when he needed you? Vincent Blackwood, my grandfather's longtime business partner, stood up from his seat in the front row. Is this true, Natalie? Were there letters from Miranda that Harrison never received? The dam broke. In the middle of what was supposed to be a dignified memorial, our family's darkest secrets spilled out for everyone to witness. Natalie accused me of abandonment. I revealed her gambling addiction. My father sat frozen in his chair, while my mother began to cry quietly. I had concerns about those amended documents, Vincent said, looking between us. Harrison was not himself in those final months. He would talk about Miranda coming home next week, even though you were still overseas. His concept of time and reality was slipping. As the uncomfortable truth emerged, my parents finally found their voices. My father admitted they had witnessed Natalie pressuring Grandpa Harrison to sign papers when he was heavily medicated. My mother confessed they had remained silent out of fear of Natalie's retaliation. He wouldn't have known what he was signing, Dad said, his voice barely audible in the now silent room. His good days were becoming rare by then. Natalie's public meltdown became complete when she knocked over a floral arrangement and screamed, "He gave everything to me because I deserved it. Miranda abandoned us for her precious career. She doesn't get to waltz back and claim what's mine." As community leaders and business associates witnessed her unraveling, I noticed several people exchanging concerned glances. The carefully crafted image Natalie had built was crumbling in real time. After the disastrous memorial, I sat in my car in the country club parking lot, tears flowing freely as the emotional weight of the confrontation hit me. A gentle tap on my window startled me. It was Dr. Palmer, our family physician who had treated Grandpa through his decline. "Miranda, I've been wanting to speak with you since you returned," he said after I rolled down the window. "There are things about your grandfather's condition that I couldn't discuss before, but after what I witnessed today, I believe you should know the truth." Dr. Palmer confirmed what I had suspected. By the time the amended documents were signed, my grandfather was experiencing significant cognitive impairment. He would have moments of clarity, but they were unpredictable and brief. He was not capable of making informed decisions about complex financial matters during that period. That night, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Holloway, an attorney who had worked with my grandfather years before William Pearson took over his legal affairs. "I need to meet with you," Marcus said, his voice grave. "There are irregularities with the notarization on those amended documents. And there's something else, something Harrison left with me just in case," as he put it. The next morning, in Marcus's modest office downtown, I watched with mounting emotion as he played a video recording my grandfather had made nearly 5 years earlier, when he was still entirely himself. "If you're viewing this," Grandpa Harrison said, looking directly into the camera, "then something has gone wrong with my estate plans. I'm recording this as insurance against any future complications." He detailed his explicit wishes for his estate to be divided equally between his granddaughters, with provisions for my parents' care. Miranda and Natalie each have different strengths. Together, they could build something even greater than what I've created. Apart, I fear destruction. Marcus then showed me copies of the original will and estate documents he had kept secure. Harrison asked me to maintain these separately, just in case. He never specified what he feared might happen, but he was a careful man who understood human nature. As I left Marcus's office clutching copies of the original documents, something shifted inside me. The raw pain of betrayal transformed into cool, calculated determination. This wasn't just about money or property now. It was about honoring my grandfather's true wishes and restoring the integrity of his legacy. The time for tears and shock had passed. Now was the time for strategic action. The morning after meeting with Marcus Holloway, I woke with absolute clarity about what needed to be done. This would not be a reactive, emotional fight, but a carefully orchestrated campaign to restore justice. I started by scheduling a consultation with Catherine Zhang, an attorney specializing in elder law and contested wills. "What you're describing is unfortunately common," Catherine said after I laid out the full situation. "Elder financial abuse often occurs within families, particularly when cognitive decline is involved. The good news is that you have several strong indicators of undue influence." Catherine explained that successfully challenging the amended documents would require substantial evidence beyond just my suspicions. We needed to prove Grandpa Harrison lacked capacity when signing, that Natalie had exerted undue influence, and that the original documents reflected his true intentions. "This won't be quick or easy," Catherine warned. "Your sister has had a year to entrench herself and potentially dissipate assets. We need to move strategically." My next step was connecting with Thomas Bradley, a forensic financial expert Catherine recommended. Thomas specialized in tracing assets and identifying suspicious transactions in estate disputes. "The first red flag is the timing," Thomas noted as he reviewed bank statements I had obtained. "Look at these large withdrawals beginning shortly after your grandfather's cognitive decline was documented. And these transfers to casinos and luxury retailers tell an interesting story about priorities." Working methodically, Thomas identified over $430,000 in suspicious transactions from my grandfather's accounts in the months before his death. Many coincided with dates when, according to my father's reluctant testimony, Natalie had been alone with Grandpa Harrison managing his paperwork. Meanwhile, I reached out to Olivia Peterson, my grandfather's executive assistant for over 15 years before Natalie fired her. Initially hesitant to get involved, Olivia opened up after I shared the video recording Marcus had shown me. "Your grandfather was not himself in those final months," Olivia confirmed. "He would ask for you multiple times a day, Miranda. Natalie would tell him you were too busy to call, even when I knew you had been trying to reach him." Olivia had kept detailed notes about visitors, phone calls, and my grandfather's mental state as part of her job duties. These contemporaneous records would prove invaluable in establishing the timeline of manipulation. While building my case, I maintained a deliberately calm exterior during unavoidable family interactions. Natalie, emboldened by years of getting her way, mistook my composure for surrender. At a tense Sunday dinner, she casually mentioned plans to sell the lake house property. "It's just sitting there empty," she said, cutting into her steak. "A developer has offered 7 figures to build luxury condos. Smart business move." The lake house that had been in our family for 3 generations, where Grandpa had taught us to fish and told stories by the fire, was about to be bulldozed for a quick profit. I simply nodded and asked her to pass the salt, filing this information away while my heart silently broke. My parents watched our interaction with visible anxiety, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a tennis match. They had become so accustomed to Natalie's emotional explosions that my restraint clearly unnerved them. On the financial front, I secured a temporary position with a local urban development firm. The role utilized my international experience, but paid significantly less than my previous work. Still, it provided stability while I built my case. I lived modestly in a small apartment, cooking simple meals and driving my old college car I retrieved from storage. Meanwhile, Natalie continued flaunting new purchases and luxury vacations on social media. The contrast in our behaviors did not go unnoticed by my grandfather's former colleagues and friends. Several approached me privately, offering statements about conversations where Grandpa Harrison had explicitly discussed his intentions for equal inheritance. He was so proud of both his granddaughters, Samuel Winters, his longtime friend, told me. He specifically mentioned wanting the business split between you, with your international perspective balancing Natalie's local connections. Through diligent research, I discovered that the notary who had verified the amended documents had been a casual acquaintance of Natalie's from her casino visits. This connection, while not proof of wrongdoing in itself, added another suspicious element to the growing case. Catherine advised documenting everything meticulously. I created comprehensive timelines, cross-referenced witness statements with medical records and financial transactions, and built a detailed picture of the manipulation that had occurred. Presentation matters in court, Catherine counseled. We need to tell a clear, factual story that any judge can follow. Emotional accusations will undermine your credibility. To prepare for potential testimony, I participated in practice sessions where Catherine grilled me with the same aggressive questions Natalie's attorney might ask. Initially, these sessions left me drained and tearful, but gradually I developed the ability to respond factually without becoming emotionally derailed. A breakthrough came when Jeffrey, Natalie's husband, requested to meet me privately at a coffee shop outside town. Looking nervously over his shoulder, he handed me a USB drive. "Natalie doesn't know I have these," he said quietly. "She asked me to delete them from our home computer, but I made copies first. They're emails between her and someone named Kevin about how to handle your grandfather's finances. I can't be part of this anymore, Miranda. It's wrong." The emails revealed explicit discussions about manipulating my grandfather during his good days to get documents signed, plans to intercept my communications, and calculations of how quickly they could liquidate certain assets before anyone noticed. With each piece of evidence, my case strengthened. But perhaps the most powerful tool emerged unexpectedly when my father, in a rare moment of courage, handed me a small leather-bound journal. "Your grandfather kept this in his final year," Dad said, unable to meet my eyes. "Natalie doesn't know it exists. I should have given it to you sooner." The journal documented my grandfather's increasing awareness of his own cognitive decline. In trembling handwriting that deteriorated over time, he recorded moments of confusion, concerns about Natalie's sudden intense interest in his financial affairs, and repeated mentions of ensuring both his granddaughters received their fair share. A particularly heartbreaking entry read, "Asked about Miranda today. Natalie said she called to say she's too busy to visit even though I'm unwell. Doesn't sound like my Miranda. Something feels wrong, but my mind plays tricks now. Must remember to ask again tomorrow." Tomorrow had come, but with it, more confusion and manipulation. The journal provided a devastating first-hand account of a proud man aware he was losing himself and increasingly suspicious of those around him. Armed with substantial evidence and expert support, I authorized Catherine to file a formal legal challenge to the amended will and associated transfers. The initial court filings were deliberately comprehensive, demonstrating the seriousness of our challenge and the strength of our evidence. As I left the courthouse after the initial filing, I felt a strange sense of peace. Regardless of the outcome, I was honoring my grandfather's true wishes and standing up for what was right. The quiet, determined path had required patience, but it had built a foundation for justice that emotional outbursts never could have achieved. The formal legal challenge hit like a thunderclap in our family's already stormy atmosphere. I had prepared for Natalie's reaction, but the reality still surprised me. When served with the legal papers, her initial response was dismissive laughter. "You think you can fight me on this?" she scoffed during an accidental meeting at our parents' house. "I have all the signed documents. I have Grandpa's lawyers on my side. This is just sad, Miranda." Her confidence lasted exactly 3 days. That's when Catherine Zhang filed our complete evidence package with the court, including the video recording, the journal, financial forensics, medical testimony about Grandpa's cognitive state, and witness statements from business associates. The sheer volume and quality of evidence triggered an immediate court order freezing the remaining assets pending resolution. Natalie's attorney, an expensive litigator from a prestigious firm in the city, called Catherine requesting an urgent meeting. I insisted on being present, wanting to witness the shift firsthand. "My client is open to discussing a potential settlement." The attorney began smoothly, his expensive suit and practiced smile screaming confidence he clearly didn't feel after reviewing our evidence. "That's interesting," Catherine replied coolly. "Given that we're also pursuing potential criminal charges for elder financial abuse and fraud, we expected more resistance." The attorney's smile faltered. Criminal charges would be excessive and ultimately unprovable. I spoke up, my voice steady. "We have emails explicitly discussing how to manipulate my grandfather during his lucid moments. We have financial records showing systematic asset stripping. We have medical documentation of his cognitive state when documents were signed. How much of that sounds unprovable to you? The real turning point came when we learned Natalie had already signed a purchase agreement to sell the lake house property to developers. Catherine immediately secured an emergency injunction halting the sale, literally hours before the closing was scheduled. When we appeared in court for the preliminary hearing, the differences between us became starkly visible. Natalie arrived in designer clothes, visibly agitated and whispering angrily to her attorney. I wore a simple, professional suit and remained composed, speaking only when necessary and addressing the judge with respect. Judge Harriet Winters, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened carefully as Catherine methodically presented our evidence. When Dr. Palmer testified about my grandfather's cognitive state during the period when documents were signed, the judge's expression grew increasingly severe. In your professional opinion, Dr. Palmer, was Harrison Coleman capable of understanding complex financial documents during this period? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, Dr. Palmer replied firmly. He experienced brief periods of lucidity, but they were unpredictable and typically lasted less than an hour. The consistent comprehension required to understand estate changes would have been beyond his capabilities at that stage. The forensic financial evidence presented by Thomas Bradley painted a damning picture of systematic asset depletion. Bank records showed large withdrawals coinciding with Natalie's casino visits. Property transfers occurred during periods when medical records indicated my grandfather was heavily medicated. Perhaps most devastating was the testimony from the notary, Kevin Mendez, who had authenticated the amended documents. Under oath and facing potential charges himself, Kevin admitted to irregularities. I didn't personally witness Mr. Coleman sign all the documents, he confessed reluctantly. Ms. Coleman assured me it was fine to notarize them since some were just routine paperwork her grandfather had already approved. With each damning testimony, Natalie's composure deteriorated. When she took the stand, her attempts to paint me as the uncaring granddaughter who abandoned family crumbled under cross-examination. Ms. Coleman, Catherine asked calmly, can you explain why your grandfather's journal repeatedly mentions trying to contact Miranda while you told him she was too busy? He was confused, Natalie snapped. He didn't remember conversations from one day to the next. Then why, Catherine continued, displaying evidence on the courtroom screen, do we have these text messages from you to Kevin Mendez discussing the need to intercept Miranda's letters and calls? My parents, subpoenaed as witnesses, provided perhaps the most painful testimony. My father admitted to witnessing Natalie pressuring Grandpa to sign documents while he was clearly disoriented. My mother confirmed that Natalie had deliberately misrepresented my communications and intentions. We were wrong, my father said, his voice breaking. We should have protected Harrison from this manipulation. We should have stood up for Miranda. Our silence made us complicit. After 3 grueling days of testimony, Judge Winters issued an interim ruling that froze all remaining assets, removed Natalie from any position of control in the family business, and appointed a court trustee to prevent further dissipation of the estate. The evidence presented raises serious concerns about the validity of the amended estate documents, the judge stated. Pending final determination, protective measures are clearly warranted. The ruling was a seismic shift in our family dynamic. My parents, seeing the legal momentum clearly turning, finally found the courage to stand against Natalie's manipulation. When she stormed into their house demanding they recant their testimony, my father stood his ground. No more, Natalie, he said firmly. What you did was wrong. It ends now. After the interim ruling, Jeffrey approached me outside the courthouse. Without Natalie present, he provided additional documentation of conversations and plans she had shared with him regarding the inheritance manipulation. I should have done this sooner, he said, looking genuinely remorseful. I kept telling myself it was just family business, not my place to interfere. But watching you fight for what's right, I can't be part of the lie anymore. With the court's protective orders in place and substantial evidence mounting, Natalie's attorney pushed hard for settlement negotiations. Catherine arranged a formal settlement conference with all parties present. The atmosphere was tense as we gathered in a conference room at the courthouse. Throughout the negotiations, I maintained a calm, factual approach that contrasted sharply with Natalie's emotional outbursts. When she accused me of trying to destroy her life, I simply referenced the evidence showing her systematic destruction of our grandfather's legacy. "This isn't about punishing you, Natalie," I said evenly. "It's about restoring our grandfather's true wishes and preserving what he built. He wanted us to share his legacy, not destroy it fighting each other." As the settlement discussions progressed, it became clear that Natalie's position was untenable. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attorney clearly communicated the risks of proceeding to trial. When Catherine outlined the potential for criminal charges beyond the civil case, Natalie finally began to grasp the seriousness of her situation. The settlement we ultimately reached reflected both the strength of our case and my desire to honor Grandpa Harrison's true intentions rather than seek retribution. Natalie would return substantial assets to the estate for equal division as originally intended. The construction business would be properly managed by professionals until we determined its future. The Lake House property sale was permanently canceled, with the property placed in a family trust. As we left the final settlement conference, Natalie attempted one last manipulation, approaching me with tears and apologies, suggesting we could now repair our relationship and be sisters again. I looked at her directly, seeing clearly the pattern that had defined our relationship since childhood. "Accountability comes before reconciliation, Natalie. When you're ready to truly acknowledge what you did without justifications, we can begin that conversation." Her face hardened immediately, the false tears disappearing. In that moment, I knew I had truly broken free from the manipulation that had controlled our family for years. The assets were beginning to return to their rightful ownership, but the more valuable freedom was internal. The liberation from toxic patterns that had persisted for decades. The legal victory brought financial restoration, but rebuilding my life and family relationships proved to be a more complex process. After the settlement was finalized, I used a portion of my recovered inheritance to establish the Miranda Coleman Foundation, dedicated to supporting ethical business practices and educational opportunities in our community. This foundation will preserve the values that truly mattered to my grandfather, I explained at the launch event, attended by many of his former colleagues and friends. Integrity, education, and community service were his North Stars, long before financial success came. The construction company required significant rehabilitation after Natalie's mismanagement. I worked with industry experts to assess the damage and develop a recovery plan. My first act was rehiring the loyal employees Natalie had dismissed, including Walter and many others who had dedicated decades to my grandfather's company. "Miranda has her grandfather's spirit," Walter commented during our first staff meeting. "She understands that a business is about more than balance sheets. It's about people and principles." The lake house restoration became a personal project symbolizing the recovery of our family legacy. Years of neglect under Natalie's ownership had left it deteriorating. I spent weekends cleaning, repairing, and carefully restoring the property to its former charm, preserving the special places that held our strongest family memories. Rebuilding relationships with my parents followed a more complicated path. Their complicity in Natalie's manipulation had created a breach of trust that couldn't be instantly repaired. We began with weekly dinners where difficult conversations gradually gave way to tentative new understanding. "We failed you," my father acknowledged during one of these conversations. "We failed your grandfather too." The path of least resistance seemed easier in the moment, but the cost was far greater than we ever imagined. My mother's journey to accountability moved more slowly, her instinct to protect Natalie deeply ingrained. "I always made excuses for her behavior," Mom admitted eventually. "I thought I was being a good mother, but I was actually preventing her from facing consequences that might have helped her grow." Setting clear boundaries became essential for my own healing. I made it clear to my parents that I valued our relationship but would no longer participate in dynamics that enabled destructive behavior. This stance initially created discomfort, but ultimately fostered healthier interactions. Natalie's response to the settlement reflected her entrenched patterns. Initially, She cast herself as the victim of an unfair legal system, telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated the court against her. When this narrative gained little traction given the extensive evidence presented, she attempted a different approach. I made some mistakes, she told me during an awkward encounter at a community event. But you have to admit you abandoned the family when you went overseas. You can't disappear for years and expect everything to wait for you. I was building schools for children who had nothing, Natalie, I responded calmly. That wasn't abandonment. It was using my skills to help others while trusting my family to handle things honorably at home. The conversation ended with her walking away, but it marked the beginning of a long, uneven path toward potential reconciliation. I offered Natalie a choice: engage in family therapy to address the deep-rooted issues between us, or maintain a distant but civil relationship. Initially rejecting both options, she eventually agreed to occasional family gatherings with clear behavioral expectations. Timothy, my nephew who had been used as justification for the inheritance theft, became an unexpected bridge. Now 7 years old, he showed curiosity about the great-grandfather he barely remembered. I began taking him fishing at the lake house, teaching him the same lessons Grandpa Harrison had taught me about patience and perseverance. Mom says you lived in a jungle, Timothy said during one of these outings. Not exactly a jungle, I laughed. I lived in Singapore and traveled to villages in Southeast Asia building schools. Were there tigers? These simple conversations with Timothy restored a small measure of normal family interaction, creating spaces where the weight of betrayal could temporarily lift. Professionally, I found a new path that honored both my international experience and local commitments. Rather than returning overseas, I developed a consultancy connecting local construction resources with international development projects. This work allowed me to maintain global impact while remaining present for the continuing family healing process. On the 1-year anniversary of the settlement, I hosted a small gathering at the restored lake house. The guest list was selective, those who had supported truth and justice through the difficult process. My parents attended, visibly emotional as they walked through the property that now honored their father's memory authentically. Jeffrey came with Timothy, though Natalie declined the invitation. Aunt Rebecca, Vincent, Dr. Palmer, and others who had courageously provided testimony joined us. Standing on the dock where Grandpa Harrison had taught us to fish decades earlier, I reflected on the journey. A year ago, I thought this was primarily about money and property, I told the gathered friends. I've come to understand it was really about truth, integrity, and honoring promises. The material assets matter far less than the principles they represent. The most profound learning came through my journal entries during the healing process. Writing by the lake at sunset, I documented the complex emotions of rebuilding after betrayal. The greatest challenge, I wrote one evening, has been finding the balance between justice and vindictiveness. There were moments I wanted Natalie to suffer as I had suffered. I've come to understand that such thinking only extends the damage. True justice restores what was broken without creating new destruction. The wisdom gained through this painful journey became unexpectedly valuable to others. When Samuel Winter's daughter found herself in a similar situation with her brother manipulating their mother's estate, she reached out for guidance. Over coffee, I shared the practical and emotional lessons I had learned. Document everything, I advised. Build your case methodically. But most importantly, keep your heart intact through the process. Fighting for justice doesn't require becoming bitter. Several such conversations led to the creation of a support group for individuals navigating family financial betrayal. The group focused not just on legal strategies but on maintaining emotional health while pursuing justice. What began as my personal nightmare transformed into a resource helping others find their way through similar darkness. The most meaningful closure came on what would have been my grandfather's 85th birthday. I sat alone on the lake house porch, holding the compass he had given me before my departure for Singapore years earlier. "The needle always points true north," I whispered, remembering his words, "even when the path seems unclear." In that quiet moment, I realized the true inheritance wasn't the business, properties, or financial assets. It was the unwavering moral compass he had instilled in me. The certainty that integrity matters more than expediency, that promises should be kept even when inconvenient, and that genuine wealth lies in relationships built on trust. The journey from betrayal to resolution had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, wisdom I hadn't sought, and capacity for forgiveness I couldn't have imagined. The path forward remained imperfect, with family relationships still in repair and trust cautiously rebuilding. But the foundation now rested on truth rather than manipulation, on accountability rather than enabling. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across waters that had witnessed generations of our family's story, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey. Some inheritances can be stolen through deception, but others, character, resilience, and integrity, remain permanently ours, growing stronger through challenge rather than diminished by it. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? I'd love to hear your stories of healing and recovery in the comments below. And if this journey of fighting for justice against family manipulation resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's most difficult challenges. Remember, sharing these experiences helps others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for being part of this healing journey with me.